this is his warehouse. Now, if you've been watching the channel, you will have seen me do films here before. And yeah, so just have another look. He's been tidying up, he's been getting like with like, and it's looking beautiful. And Bob is doing some work at the moment on the warehouse, getting things organised. He's doing a lot of work around the house. So here we are. So I need to pick a few things off. He's got some stuff for me, so I need to look for some specific things. So you're just gonna have to get to see me shopping, I'm afraid. And if you fancy any of this, get in touch with Bob. Decent prices, and I will flash things up on the screen. Spectrum is green, Angel Interceptor, there we go, falling down the Captain Scarlet rabbit hole at the moment. Decided I need to buy this because Network have just gone down, and you know, this is easily the best of the puppet series, and I probably won't get through it because as a kid you think they're brilliant, as an adult you realise they're quite boring, but you know, the iconography and the effects and everything, brilliant. So a bit of that. So moving on, as you can see from the frame narrative interspersed before and through and around this, I've been to Honest Bob's again. Bob in Dorset, Mrbook451. You can send him your wants lists. He doesn't have a website yet, but he's been dealing for years and selling for years anyway. If you see anything on the video you fancy, get in touch with Bob. I'll flash the email up on the screen. Very nice chap. Don't send him a zip file because he won't open it. Be sensible. Okay, so I'm just going to take you through some of the things that that I sort of picked up from him, really. And I'm not going to show you everything because I did some upgrading. So I started to write an upgrading list a while ago of paperbacks. So paperbacks I've had for like a million years, which I bought mostly from second-hand bookshops and here on my own places way back in the 80s and 90s for the internet, and the only copies I could find, and some of them weren't great to start with, and I'm trying to sort of replace some of the sort of key things with better looking ones. So it's a bit of that, but I'm not going to go through those. But I think that's going to become a bit of a thing for me, actually. I've started to do a little bit of it, but it means then I can pass the old copies on via eBay or to friends or what have you. So you might see some things popping up on my eBay. I'm not eBaying anything at the moment. I'm going to put some things up probably around about the time you see this, I imagine, so you never know. There won't be a lot, but it'll be cherry-picked good stuff. Anyway, so what have we got besides Captain Scarlet and Angel Interceptor? Look at that, isn't that fantastic? Got a couple of those. Destiny Angel, she was my favourite. The card is here somewhere, they were still sealed, and tells you all about her, but you know, this isn't a Jerry Anderson channel, so there's plenty of those out there, good fun too. But I put this here to honour Eric Brown, who I mentioned a few times recently, who died recently, and he was only about 60, so the same age as me, so it's really, really sad. And this is New York Nights, as you can see, first of the Virex trilogy, and very beautiful, and Bob's got several of these at very decent price. If you fancy giving Eric a try, that's one to look at. Nice Golanx hardcover. Anyway, what have I been getting besides Bob's stuff? A couple of things which just popped through the letterbox in the good old postie, and this has only just come out from Chicago Review Press in the good old US of A, and this is The Waves Extinguish the Shore by the Strugatsky brothers. And this is one of the Maxim Camera books, which comes after Inhabited Island, aka Prisoners of Power. And they did two at the same time. This one's been hard to get, so I actually got it from Blackwell via Amazon. And yeah, I should have just gone to Blackwell really, but I get sort of free postage with the Prime and stuff on that really. So there we go. So this is one of the Noon Universe Maxim Camera books. So there you go. So there's tons of Strugatsky out there. So don't just stick with Roadside Picnic and Hard to Be a God. Spread your wings and move outward. Isn't that lovely? Nice trade paperback. God knows where I'll get out of reading it, but there you go. It is what it is. Also, something I picked up recently, because you know I've been burbling on the channel about the very wonderful Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough. I don't know how I didn't know this. I've not looked at her bibliography in enormous detail ever. I have looked at it, but not in enormous detail. And this is a science fiction novel she came up with in the early 80s called Hyacinth. And there are plenty of these on eBay. Got this from the States. And it's, look at that, it's a double-day review copy from 1953. Lovely. And it's about when the populace becomes sort of mind-numbed by too much sort of technology, internet and what have you. And I thought, yeah, Chelsea, that's for me. So, and I've read a lot of her fantasy works, but not so much of her SF. And it says, in a future of rabid banality, mankind is numb to all the most potent stimuli. Television, books, theatre, even century-round films fail to sate the masses' hunger for entertainment. So she goes on with something called the Dream Web. So that's very much an internet sort of VR based thing in 1983. Looking forward to that because I do love Chelsea, as I've been saying. Then we're going to move on and look at the other things. Now let's have a look. Some hold stock. So we need to look at those. Now where can I put these? Ah, there's some rather handsome chairs here. And just pop those on there. I wonder if he's got all three of them. I need to have a look because there's two of the three, and those are the US tour editions. Right, so what have we got? Oaken Kings. Okay. Now that's volume 3, but it's a different livery and it's Golags. Do I want to go with a different livery? I'd prefer not to, but you never know. Let's have a look. There's some nice Kim Stanley Robinsons if you want those, but you know, they're not cheap, those. Bob's prices are normally excellent. But of course, you know, some books are super uncommon. So what else do we have? Well, we've got a lot of A format paperbacks here, and they're not in any order. I'm just going to sort of go through them and burble on about them. So this is kind of a book haul, as they say. How I laugh. And recently I've been reappraising Fritz Lieber after, I think it was about this time last year when I started the Collector's Diary thread. I picked up a Nebula Awards anthology in Clifton in Bristol. It's on one of the videos. It's on the first Collector's Diary, I think, maybe the second. And I've read Catch That Zeppelin, which was a Nebula winner, or at least shortlisted, and I wasn't very impressed by it. It was the first Lieber I'd read for years. So I decided to go back and pick some other things up which I'd got rid of or never read. And something, I really wanted the Fontana edition of this. I think it was a Fontana, but I can't find one in good nick. And Bob had this, and this is a 4-square edition of Gather Darkness, which is a great title. And this sort of combines witchcraft with the sort of, you know, nuclear age. In a way that kind of reminds me of James Blish's After Such Knowledge, and 4 Squares kind of before my time really, because they sort of precursor of New English Library, and I don't normally go for them, but that was really, really nice. So I decided to give that one a pip, and we'll see really what happens. So I'll just pop it there for the time being so you to feast your eyes on it. And yeah, I'm just going to go through these in the order they come. So this will be utterly amorphous. You know, plunge you into the pool of SF. Now, this is something which I remember selling, or at least trying to sell back in the 80s. This is in Women's Press SF, which, as I've said before, back in the 80s when it was a thing, you know, it was guys buying them as far as I could tell. There weren't many women even daring to try SF. There were some, of course, but for some reason, you know, they just weren't trying it. And this is Josephine Saxton, British writer, Queen of the States. And it's about a woman called Magdalene, and she's on her own planet. And it's one of those ambiguous things, you know, is she just sort of bonkers and having visions, or, you know, have the aliens really landed, as it says on the back? And it's, so the Queen of the States means 2 different things there. So it's quite an interesting one. Looking forward to that. And she's an interesting writer, and I should really read more by her. Josephine Saxton, female British SF writer, active 60s, 70s, 80s mostly, Queen of the States, Women's Press. There you go. And it bags nicely as well by Bob. The Pan Lozenge. We love the Pan Lozenge. You heard the term Pan Lozenge here first, and Steve Coynett has been using it for many years, as his chums who knew him prior to Outlaw Bookseller on YouTube will tell you. And there's about 20 Pan Lozenges I don't have. I realised there are about 60 altogether. I realised one day that I'd had most of them and got rid of a load because they're books I didn't like or they're in bad nick. This is one which I have the hardcover first and I've got it signed. It's Robert Holstock's first book, and this is I Among the Blind, which I think is a fantastic title. Good little book. Brian Aldiss liked it, and in his early days, his first 3 novels, they're this interesting combination of kind of archaeology and folklore and the kind of Celtic-y thing he moved on to, but usually set on other planets. And this one is the best title, I Among the Blind, and there's a kind of feel of early Lagan about them as well, so that's one to watch out for. Now, Dave Brzezinski told me that this, apparently there were loads and loads of copies around at one point. Somebody at a con had tons and tons and tons, and it was easy to get, and I was saying how hard it was to get, but what I meant was in really good nick, and he said they are out there. So I've had this before, but it's great to have it in good condition. I Among the Blind, lovely, lovely stuff. So there we go. I'm going to take Eric from there and expose the microphone lead. Gosh, how unprofessional, because I just think really we need to sort of give these books their own day in the sun and move this one on. So great chamber, Eric, lovely guy. Pop that over there. So that's I Among the Blind. Then this is a book which I read a long time ago. I haven't reread it for quite some time. It's a very famous book. It's very, very good indeed. I've sold loads of copies over the years. I never sell as many as I would like to, but I realised the other day I think I've only ever had it in an omnibus called The Complete Nebula award-winning fiction, and that's Samuel R. Delaney's Babel 17. There we go. And Babel 17 is one of the great space operas. It's about linguistics and identity, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's about sort of a kind of first contact type thing. Has a female character as a lead. Also, you know, he's always been big on minorities before it was fashionable to be that, and of course he is theoretically from a minority himself. And this is a Sphere edition from, I would say, let's have a look, it's late 60s, and very, very beautiful. I love that cover, and I'd never seen that before, and it's absolutely spiffing. So I do have Babel 17 now as a singleton, not in an omnibus. Why don't I have hardcover? It's very expensive. It's very uncommon. When you do find it, it's on one of the old Gollancz yellow jackets, not the 70s or 80s ones, it's the 60s ones. So it's basically yellow paper, and they're always in a state, though Bob's got one, and you might see that in the other video which I shot at Bob, so we'll see. So Babel 17, if you want to read a great space opera with wonderful ideas at its heart, this is the one to read. And the cleverest thing about this for me, let me just see, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting, because the one I've got in the omnibus may be slightly revised, because in that there are little sidebars in the text on a page. You'll have a little bit of text on its own, and you have to jump to that at certain points. And what's clever is you seem to do it instinctively, and it's not in our edition. So maybe he added that later. Some more research is required. Then, good grief, a book from the 1990s, or maybe later. Let's have a look at this. Let's see. It's from... what date is this? 1994, 93 in hardcover. Now I know the US text is different, and I think it may be longer, and I've been trying to decide which edition to get. This is Paul Park, Collie Estes, and this is about somebody who is like the perfect woman, but she has a secret. Underneath the surface, she's actually something or someone else. There you go. Paul Park, very highly rated by my good friend Graham M. Bray. This is a review copy from HarperCollins. They dropped Grafton at that point. They got the fire and water symbol, and yeah, look at that, it's got a review slip in it. So there we go. And he's somebody who I really do need to get behind. Great critical reputation. This is from the period where I wasn't reading much SF, and do you remember I was doing my 1990s TBR? That didn't go very far, so we'll see. Oh, we've dropped the review slip, we'll pick it up later, but a very handsome book. And buying that off Bob very cheaply means that I won't run out and buy a hardcover, because I was thinking of getting one from Cold Tonnage, but there you go. Anyway, time for some water. It's very hot in here today, so if you can hear a fan whirring in the background, forgive me. But you're used to the exotic locales after my garden shoot, things like that. That wasn't my garden, by the way, in the summer SF thing. Honestly, it really wasn't. If my garden was like that, I'd be in it all the time. I wouldn't be doing any gardening, of course. I'd be reading SF novels. But there you go. It was a friend. Very kind of my friend to lend that garden to me. Nice, wasn't it? Then we move on, and it's time for a bit of horror actually. And when I did the Ray Bradbury video, I think I mentioned that the story The Illustrated Man, the short story The Illustrated Man, is not actually in the book The Illustrated Man, and it's not. It is in some American collections, but I looked through all of mine and it's not in any of mine, and I knew I'd read it, and I recalled that I'd read it from a Pan book of horror stories, and before I could even research it, people were saying it's the 8th Pan book of horror stories, and this is it. That's it there. And these, I mean, this is in good nick, and this is like a late 60s, early 70s one, because this is 25p, and I had this back in the day, and I had quite a few of these when I was a kid in school, and I used to read them from cover to cover, and there's some real hack work in them, but there's famous people as well, like there's Patricia Highsmith in one of them, Ian McEwan in another, and this is the one that has The Illustrated Man, which I haven't reread it yet. I read some of the other stories on this on the way back from Bob's on the train, and it really took me back. Some of them were really gory. These normally fetch anything from, I mean, the ones you see out there on eBay are usually anything from about 8 to 20 quid, and they're always in a total state. To get like a mint one of any printing is really uncommon, and people are paying silly money. It's part of the whole paperbacks from hell thing, even though these weren't really featured because they're not American. But great. I wish I'd kept my originals, because I'd like all the ones I used to have now, and they're expensive, and you know me, I like nice cheap books in excellent condition. Bob, of course, being the man, I had that for, well, it was less than 3 quid, so you can't really argue with that. Great stuff. So Illustrated Man. Having a look at it actually, there's other things of interest in here. There's other major writers. I mean, some of the minor writers, I don't clue who they are, but there's also Gerald Kirsch, who was a very famous writer in his time, wrote mainstream novels. And let's see. Yeah, it's Gerald Kirsch. It's Kirsch and Bradbury in this one, really. And there's AGJ Ruff. That's got to be a pseudonym, isn't it? Mr. Ruff. That's pretty rough stuff as well. So there you go. So if you've never read any of these, particularly the early ones by Herbert Van Thal, they're really cracking. They're really good stuff. But there's some real exploitation in them as well, it has to be said. So we'll pop it there in a pride of place on the podium so you can see it, because a lot of you who are younger will never have seen these. And watch out for them. Snap them up, kids. That's what I would say. More horror. This is kind of more weird fiction, Lovecraftian type thing. And this author we're going to cover next, he apparently was a really nice guy, Bob told me. I never met him. And he wrote loads of different things over years and years and years, virtually any genre you can think of. And that's Basil Copper. And this is The Great White Space. Look at that. In Sphere, and you read the back of this, and I've never read this, I've always loved this cover, and it just sounds exactly the same as At the Mountains of Madness, except at the North Pole. Except we know that, you know, there isn't a solid sort of ground in the North Pole, it's just ice. The Great Northern Expedition is caverns, so maybe it's not quite the North Pole. You know, August Derleth likes it. He gets compared to M.R. James and Algernon Blackwood. Not sure about that. It looks more Lovecraftian to me, but I will let you know. But isn't that fantastic, from the 70s? And this is a book you see now and again, always in state. But with Bob, of course, everything is just lovely. Super. I decided to go for another copper as well, because you don't see them very much, as I say. And this is a collection of short stories called Herbie Demons, spelt Daemons, of course, which is a very cool spelling, very Doctor Who spelling, and excellent stuff. And it's got a hideous spider on there. So there you go. So there's that one as well. So I'll enjoy those when I'm in the mood for horror. I'm not often in the mood for horror, and I probably do prefer the more sort of traditional stuff. I read the odd contemporary thing now and again, but it's something which I like, but I couldn't read all the time. I think I'd get bored no matter how good it was. So I just like to dip my toe in now and again. So there you go. A couple of nice Basil Coppers, aren't they great? So there you go. We'll just pop that one there. Now you've had time to look at the Van Thal. Van Thal, there's a name for you, isn't it? Stick that on there. So do get in touch if you're feeling flush. Good stuff. So yeah, I'm not going to film too much here today because you can have a look at the other videos, and I do need to do a shop, and we're going to go to the pub, so that, that's quite important. So, but oh yeah, so he's doing some I-beams there, so I've got to be careful. And there's some shifting around going on, and yeah, and oh look, it's Jules Burt. Yeah. Who would you expect? Fancy meeting you somewhere like this.
I know.
Who would have thought it?
It is literally science fiction heaven.
It is, isn't it? It's great, isn't it?
Incredible.
It's condition, it's quantity, and it's quality, and it's absolutely lovely. So as you can see, we're having a fun time, and Jules has got a stash there. I'm going to film it too closely because he'll do a book haul, and that's for his channel, not mine. So, so I must behave myself. But yeah, so if you've not watched any of the other videos that I've done or that Jules has done here at Dorset Bob's, you must. And as I say, I'm not going to film too much more today because I want to do some shopping. Right, fantasy. Fantasy, I hear you say. Fantasy on this channel. What we do now and again is a bit of fantasy. And this is a book which I used to have in this very livery, this edition. And you're going back a really long time. You're talking like I bought this second-hand in the early 80s. This was the first in a series, of which there were 20 eventually, and they were written early part of the century. And James Branch Cabell, and this is The Figures of Earth in tandem. And this is the first of the Manuel of Poctesme series. I say there were 20 of them. I've only read the first 3. I managed to get the second one a while ago, same livery. So I'm now looking out for Jurgen, which is the third one and the most famous one, which was actually at the centre of an obscenity trial at one point, which is very strange when you look at it from the modern perspective, or the contemporary perspective, I should say. So there we are. And really, really nice. I don't think tandem went beyond the first 3, but I say there were 20 altogether. And one of the sort of great pre-Tolkien fantasies. Very, very unusual. There's a Gollum type story at the heart of this, but absolutely lovely. Tandem, really great. You don't see them like that anymore. Beautiful. And when you do, they're in a state, as I always say. But as I always say, when you get them from Bob, Bob's got lots of things in great condition. So send him your wants list, guys. He will help you out as much as he can. Then, what else do we have? More fantasy. More fantasy. In fact, I'm going to have a shuffle here, and I'm going to try and do all the fantasy together now. Bear with me. I should have organised this better, but I'm in a rather languid mode this morning, as you can probably tell. It's been a tough week, been back to work, with my sort of health problems, and done some short shifts and what have you, and they've been really, really good to me, which is great. But I am sort of feeling it this morning. I'm a bit tired, so we'll take it in a leisurely way. So sit back and have your coffee and relax and what have you. Right. Again, something else I used to have, got rid of. I got rid of loads of my fantasy novels a long time ago, and I'm finding I'm rebuying the sort of key things. And you notice I bought some things for nostalgia reasons, the Donaldson, the Eddings, which I never had at the time. But this is one which I used to have, and this is a Pan Ballantine shared edition. So this must have been a deal that Pan must have done with Ballantine and exported it, which is weird because I know Ballantine did these in the States. And this is A Fish Dinner in Mnemosyne by E.R. Edison, author of The Worm Ouroboros. And this is the third in that sequence, and I've not read these for ages. They're quite ornate for what I recall, and I am looking to revisit the pre-Tolkien fantasies of note, just to sort of get back into that flavour of things, really, because it's been a very long time, and I do like this sort of thing. Absolutely beautiful. So I'm looking out now for the first and second volumes, and I can't for the life of me think what the second one is called. I could open this up and have a look, but it's so nice in that bag, I'm going to leave it there. Isn't that beautiful? A Fish Dinner in Mnemosyne. Now, really, the thing is, that's fantasy. It's so what fantasy novels now have titles like that? Do you know what I mean? They just pile cliche on cliche, same old tropes, same old symbols. Fish Dinner in Mnemosyne. You're instantly transported to another world, to a different place. And that's supposed to be what fantasy's about, isn't it? Isn't it supposed to be about the imagination, when it just seems to be about spoon feeding people the same old crap? That's how it ends up a lot, or it seems to me. But it is what it is. If people like comfort reading, that's all very well and good. I'll stick with the Angel Interceptor. Right. Finally on fantasy, it's not finally because there's two more to come. This is something I think Matt Defoe at Science Fiction Reads picked this up the other day. And this is an edition of this book which is reasonably common in the States. And it's a big book split into 2 volumes by William Hope Hodgson. And Bob had this one, so I've got to find volume 1 now. And again, it's in beautiful nick with an unbroken spine, what have you. And this is The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson, who's somebody I have read. I have other things by him. And the one I wish that I'd hang on to, I used to have a really nice copy of The House on the Borderland. I got rid of it. And, you know, there isn't a nice copy of it now because it's print on demand. And it just, because it's out of copyright, it means that anybody can do it. It means that none of the sort of proper publishers are doing a really nice edition anymore. And it got snapped up. And Hodgson is really sort of like chewy and eldritch. And of course he was killed in World War One. Great shame, he was quite young. A lot of sea stories, you know, and Lovecraft worshipped him. And if you like weird fiction, he's really, really good. So that's volume 2, so I've got to find volume 1 from somewhere. But it will come my way in time. You be diligent, you keep looking, you wait, you scour, you have a list. It'll come together. Last but one on the fantasy stakes is this lovely book of ghost stories. Now, ghost stories, fantasy, I heard you say, what about horror? No such thing as horror. Horror isn't a genre, it's an approach, it's a marketing category. Supernatural fiction is fantasy. Horror, some of it is supernatural, some of it is science fiction based, some of it's crime based. It's a bricolage, not a genre, as I've said before. But I was really pleased to get this because this is somebody who I haven't mentioned them yet in my Capri videos, and for those of you who don't watch my Capri videos, you should, because there's lots of literary stuff in them, and you see me getting up to all sorts of things as well, in a very beautiful and exciting place where lots of writers hang out, and lots of writers hung out there because it was very inspiring and gave them all sorts of ideas. H.G. Wells spent time. Watch the H.G. Wells one. So this is somebody I've not mentioned in the videos yet, but he spent some time there as well, and that's E.F. Benson, and that's The Tale of an Empty House and Other Ghost Stories. And this is a B format paperback. As you can see, it's bigger than that one there. So it's that's an A format, this is a B format, and I will do the formats video eventually. And this is the common format these days, of course. And it's in Black Swan, a lovely imprint, which was part of Transworld, Corgi Bantam, and lovely. Beautiful. And I've been wanting to pick up a Benson collection of ghost stories for a while, and I keep looking at Wordsworth, I think it is, do a complete one for about £5, and it's on rubbishy paper. There's a vintage one, there's other ones out there, and he wrote loads and loads, but I just wanted a taster really. And the first ghost story I ever read was by E.F. Benson, and that was The Bus Conductor, and I read it in one of Mary Danby's collections of something like the Fifth Armada Book of Ghost Stories for Kids, something like that it was called. I do see it around, I must pick it up at some point. And The Bus Conductor was one of the 3 segments, I think there's 3 segments, in the famous post-war British Ealing portmanteau film Dead of Night. So like the Amicus films, there's different stories in a frame narrative, and it's really, really good, and it really sticks you, and it's very original as well. So I'm really looking forward to this. And Benson spent some time on Capri, and yeah, so that is very, very much. He wrote 80 books. He's very prolific, so that's really lovely. So I saw that there amongst Bob's bees, and I thought I'll have that, and I can use it as a prop as well at some point. And yeah, absolutely gorgeous. Isn't that lovely? So it's just, it's quite hard sometimes to get these things with really nice covers. They tend to have cliche covers. That's a bit more subtle, which is good, and I like subtle. Right, finally on the fantasy front, this surprised even me because I saw it at Bob's when I first went there, and I thought about it, and it's a book which often people ask for big money for it. Whether anybody actually buys it is another matter. And this is somebody who I read for the first time when I was about 15, and we're talking about Piers Anthony, and I read Omnivore, which I enjoyed. I've read it several times. It's got some really strange moments in it, and I used to sell tons of Anthony's work in the 80s. He was really massive, and of course he did loads of series, and the 80s was really his heyday. Even though he did lots of stuff from the late 60s on, in the 80s he was really commercially successful in things like Incarnations of Immortality, Bio the Space Tyrant, and he did a series called Xanth with an X, which were fantasy novels. The impression that I got is that they were always bigger in the US than they were in the UK. In the UK they were published by Orbit, so they were part of Futura, MacDonald, and basically I used to stock them, but they didn't sell as quickly as his other books, and I think I've kind of worked out why. Now, people then would dig into things, they would ask questions, they would look inside books and try and work things out for themselves more than people do now, ironically. But they weren't numbered, and they were, I think they're pretty much singletons in the same sort of background. And this is A Spell for Chameleon in MacDonald hardcover, which for a while I was thinking was the first. I actually think it's the second Xanth book, and I love these MacDonald hardcovers in octavo. Beautiful. And whether I'll ever read this, I don't know. It's a sort of a nostalgia buy, and I just love that cover. And apparently it says, there's a little flash, there's a hype flash here, and says best novel of the year, British Fantasy Society. So this is, I think, early 80s. And again, I'm not going to open it because it's just so nice. On the back it tells you what other things they've done recently, and there's Songmaster by Orson Scott Card, Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin, Road Marks by Roger Zelazny, all of which are really uncommon in the MacDonald. Then the ones you see a lot are, you don't see any of them a lot. You see the Barry B. Longyear ones a lot, Enemy Mine, and a few of the other ones. And you might have seen the film of Enemy Mine. It's hilarious. I have read it. It's a very, very routine book. I think Source of Magic was the first Xanth book, and this is the second one. And I've got a few of these. I've got the Niven and Pornell ones, the ones I have, and they're just lovely. And I would love one of Road Marks, but you know, Zelazny, the Road Marks one would cost you the earth. And I think Road Marks is about to be reissued, or has already been reissued by Masterworks. I think it hasn't come yet. And Road Marks is a good one. It has this thing where chapter 1 is called chapter 1, chapter 2 is called chapter 2, chapter 3 is called chapter 1, chapter 4 is called chapter 2, just back and forth through them, and it's about a road that goes through time. And it's the only novel I've read where somebody uses a book of Baudelaire's poetry as a weapon, which is so cool. Obviously I'm not talking about Piers Anthony now, I'm talking about Zelazny, but absolutely lovely, really, really nice. So that's a nostalgia buy for my fantasy collection. So I'm going to pop that there so you can feast your eyes on it. And one gets the impression that these are sort of flippant things, but as I say, I've never ever read them, so you never know, it might happen. Some impulse there. I'd quite like to be an impulse completist, really. So yeah, so here you go, one of the finest dealerships. There's no website yet. There will be. Bob is still working. Got a day job like yours truly, but you can email him and send your wants list. Anything you see here is for sale. Isn't that lovely? Fantastic stuff. And now we'll move on to the book haul. A couple of paperbacks by the same author, which are uncommon in these liveries and uncommon in this condition. And if you are lucky or unlucky enough to find them in the wild and you want them, you may well pay a pretty penny or 9. And Bob, of course, did me a good deal on these, and they're books which I've read many times, but I didn't have them in these liveries, and they're very, very special. And I'm going to start with the earlier one, and this is J.G. Ballard's The Wind from Nowhere in Penguin. I have the later issue, which has a David Pelham cover. It does have a bit of a lean. Now, of course, this is the first Ballard novel, which he wrote in 2 weeks, and he wrote it for an American publisher, I can't think of it was, maybe Ballantine, to make enough money to make the transition to becoming a full-time writer, so he could write what he regarded as his first novel, The Drowned World. Now, this is suppressed by the Ballard estate. It has not been in print since the mid-70s. There's no sign of any reissue. He didn't want it reissued. Now that's a shame, because it's high time that somebody did do it, did a nice hardcover, because there's never been a hardcover of it. And I actually think it's very good. It's a great English catastrophe novel. It's about a wind that comes from nowhere, that gradually increases in speed and starts to destroy the world, and people have to take refuge underground. And you know, it's fantastic. He didn't think much of it, but I regard it as part of his initial disaster tetralogy. And what's great about it, and this, you could say this is a spoiler, it doesn't matter because it's Ballard, because the whole point is you turn things upside down. He never tells you where the wind from nowhere comes from. It's just there. And that to me was quite a radical thing to do, because you usually have to have this get out clause. And basically George Romero started dropping that in as an idea, you know, by the time you got to the third of his zombie film, so it doesn't matter what have you, after he'd had one explanation in the first one, which was a science fiction explanation, which there is one that holds for me. So yeah, and look at that, very beautiful, flawless, 3 and 6, so that's late 60s, absolutely gorgeous. Ballard's first novel. If you see a copy in any condition anywhere, buy it because there is no sign of the estate changing their mind, lifting it up and letting somebody do a new edition, which is a great shame because for historical reasons alone, it's really, really important stuff. We then move on to another ballad. A ballad, I have a hardcover of this. I've got a signed hardcover, but mine's a first dust. It's a Cape one from the mid-80s. I don't have the original. It's incredibly rare. I've got lots of rare ballads, but it's one I don't have. So I thought I'd go for this one because it has a very similar jacket and it has Max Ernst's painting The Eye of Silence on the cover, and this is The Crystal World in Panther. Now this used to be relatively common with this cover design and this livery, but it's become less and less common over the years, and Max Ernst, who was one of Ballard's key influences, he loved the Surrealist painters. I love the Surrealist painters as well. You know, this is really important. So that conjures up the imagery which Ballard would have wanted at the time. And also at that time, Penguin Modern Classics were putting a lot of modernist pictures on their green modern classics, and you see all sorts of things, and some of those are super rare as well and absolutely beautiful. So those were kind of like the ultimate cherries. So even though they're books I've got in other editions, they are to expand my JGB archive. Fantastic. So if you see them in any nick, pick them up, because you can always sell them on anyway because they're uncommon and people want them as collection fillers even if they're not mint. Right, what else do we have? Well, we have all manner of things here. I'm going to do some more shuffling a moment because I'm in that sort of shuffling mode, and let's get that. And we'll start with a few sort of one-offs. I did have that thing a while ago where I was buying anthologies, and my anthology collection sort of expanded hugely in a matter of months, and I've sort of tailed off a bit on that now because I need to read a load of them, but I am going to get a few more. There are some more I like because I do like a good anthology, but I only went for one this time, and that's this Sphere book, which is from, again, yeah, this is the time of transition. This is about 70-71 when Britain went from imperial to metric, and we went from the old money, as those of us who are a certain age call it, into decimal. And this was 6 shillings 30p, and this is Cities of Wonder, edited by Damon Knight. Absolutely lovely, beautiful, nice straight spine, and inside we've got Ballard, Heinlein, Kettner, Cornbluth, Walter M. Miller Jr., Blish, Aldis, E.M. Forster, Don A. Stewart, which of course is John W. Campbell Jr., Stephen Vincent Benet, French writer, and there's one name here which I recognise but it's quite obscure, Robert Abernethy. Now I haven't even looked at the contents of this because I just love the cover. Good names in the back. Now the EM Forster is almost certainly The Machine Stops. Let's have a look. If you haven't read The Machine Stops, you should. It's really good. It's a little novella, and Penguin do a really dinky little book of it. Lovely. So let's see. Where's the title page, Mr. Knight? And does it have a title page? Yes, it does. Does it have a contents? It doesn't even have a contents. I mean, come on. So without spending all day, yeah, it is. It's in this. The Machine Stops. So if you've never read The Machine Stops, it's really good. It's written in the 20s, and it kind of predicts the internet and people being cut off from each other. It's a really good story. And recently, John Fox did like a soundtrack for a play version. This is 5-6 years ago, and around about the same time the rock band Hawkwind did a concept album of it. So it's still really, you know, it's one of the important things. So it's rather like 1984 or Brave New World or these books which come from the mainstream. They're not part of genre SF, they're not part of the magazine tradition, and it's really, really good. It's really seminal stuff, but of course it's not a full-length novel, so people tend to forget it. And E.M. Forster is best known for Passage to India, Morris, things like that. Sort of Merchant Ivory films usually is what happens to his stuff. But yes, Cities of Wonder, really, really nice. Okay, the next book is one that Bob very kindly threw in for me for nothing after I'd bought some stuff off him, and I picked it up and I was fondling it, and I said, oh, put this aside for me for next time. He said, oh, have it, stick it in your bag. What a great man he is. And this is a book which I've never got around to reading. It is available as a Golax Masterwork. It's a great big thick lumping thing, and it's just horrible. I did come across a Golax hardcover yellow jacket of it in Hay, which was there in Richard Booth's for a couple of years, and it's a rare book in hardcover, a really rare book, but it was in such a state. The text block was covered in filth, and I couldn't nerve myself to buy it, and I should have, and I regretted it. So I've always wanted a nice one, and I will probably get the Masterbook to read, because this one is an A. It's not a boat. The spine is a little bit concave, and this is Cecilia Holland's Floating Worlds, and this is one of these sort of classic sort of modern SF novels by a female. She mostly wrote historical fiction, very highly rated, and I love the sort of silvery jacket. That's great. So that's going to look very spiffing in with the key A formats collection. But as I say, I'm going to get a masterwork as a reading copy, and I can let it get beat up and what have you, because that will sit pristine. And I've not read this, despite the fact it's in all the reference books. So really important stuff. There you go. Some of my friends have read it, so we'll see. It does tend to divide people, and it's a big book, it's about 600 pages. So we shall see what happens. We're going to finish off with two authors, one of whom was fairly obscure, is still obscure. She died quite recently at the age of 93, and the other author is really famous and couldn't get more famous. And let's see, I'll tell you what, let's pull this off here, and we've popped Cecilia there so you can have a look at her. There you go, that's great. And got the Angel Interceptor, and that's Doris Percercia. Now, I don't think anybody talks about Doris Percercia on the internet, on the internet. Good grief, what an old fart. I don't think anybody talks about Percercia on YouTube, BookTube, whatever you want to call it, apart from me and Scott Bradfield. And Scott beat me to it, even though had read it by that point. And I said to Bob, last time I was down there, I saw you had a couple of copies of The Deadly Sky. Please can you put one aside for me? And he had two, and he put both aside for me so I could pick my own. This is easily the nicest. And it's in Door, as you can see. There we go. And she did a lot for Door. Really, really nice. And she's just completely weird. There's nobody else like her. She does very sort of interesting linguistic twists. She once had one book in women's press, SF, in the 80s. I can't think which one it was. And then there's this one, Spaceling. Now, I've got a feeling I might already have this, but anyway, it's uncommon, so I can always pass that on and sell that on. And this is one which is really, really uncommon. And the last time I saw one of these online, it's got a little bit of marking on the front and what have you. And it's got some creasing, but the spine is good, even though it's not really yellow. And that is Doom Time. Look at that jacket. The War of the World Trees. And in Percercia, you get all sorts of weird planets, weird people. She's rather like Jack Vance on hard psychedelics and really chewy prose, but she's very readable. And yeah, some great female characters, lots of strange monsters and beings and what have you. Quite pulpy, but at the same time, there's a sort of serious, peaky and literary undertone to it all, which I really like. And yeah, so I don't know whether I've completed my collection now, but I can't be far off because she did quite a number of things and she stopped writing altogether. She did a couple of zombie novels under another name as well, which I must look into. So that's Percercia, and she's one of the great sort of lost, forgotten writers. And I would say probably, does it list in here her books? Let's have a look. Now, of course, these are doors, of course. They've got all sorts of wacky drawings and stuff. And yeah, very minimal on information about her. But what is her most famous one? I can't recall. Maybe I'll stick it up on the screen. As I say, I'm a bit tired. So yeah, so I've got a nice little Percercia stats there. So if you see any of her books, pick them up because they're wild. You'd love them. Finally, Ike, one of the big three. Somebody took me to task here a while ago for going on about the big four, and they said it's not the big four, it's the big three. Well, yeah, I know it's the big three, but there's also the big four, which is the big three plus Frank Herbert, and that's about commerce and the day of the dump-in when books suddenly ballooned in size, and those authors have been around for ages started getting bigger advances like Heinlein and Asimov, and their books went vumph, you know, they generally have been quite small, with a couple of exceptions. And we're talking about Isaac Asimov. Now, I'm really pleased with this. This is The Gods Themselves, a book which divides people. It was his comeback to SF after many, many, many years. And this is a Gonix Masterwork, and I do have a copy of this. This is a earlier printing with a hype flash just there. Lovely, lovely Chris Foss cover. And the one I've got has got some creasing and marking, and this one is pretty much pristine. Excellent. And even though I'm a relative newcomer to being a convert to Ike, and I'm not convinced by everything, I love the robot novels, the stories, not so much, no. Foundation, and I'm odd, I tend to like the later bloated stuff because it sort of suits his rather stately style, but my favourite books by him are Caves of Steel and Naked Sun, the 50s ones, which to me is when he actually becomes a writer in a real sense. So that's really nice to have that. So my other one becomes a reading copy, and I'm just so pleased with that. And of course I used to sell tons of these, and they've got such iconic jackets, these. I always love the jackets, love them. So I am kind of picking them up as I come across them in beautiful nick. What I'm trying to get is the late 80s Grafton reissues of the Foundation trilogy, 3 volumes with the false covers. I got the paperbacks, but they don't come out very often. They're usually about 80 quid a pop, and you know, for a while I was doubting whether they ever existed, and I don't remember them at the time. They certainly didn't hit the bookshops very much, and that's going to be quite a thing. Those are the Asimovs which are sort of really evading me. Speaking of evading, I'm going to finish off with a little 2-volume set by Ike, and you know, they're always out there, but I decided I wanted these, but I wanted them in really good condition, and they're always in a state. And what we have here is Nightfall 1. Look at that, isn't that fantastic? And Nightfall 2. Lurid and yellow. Now the thing is, I have all the stories in these in sort of some, you know, collected volumes which you can get now, and they're still in A format, but I haven't got these. And of course, obviously this has got Nightfall in it, which is one of the most famous SF stories of all time, and loads of people have done variations on Nightfall where you have a cosmic event, because the way the planets in a certain system and the star are arranged, and something happens once every X million years or once a year or something, and it drives the people bonkers. And you know, it all comes from this. Philip Jose Farmer's Night of Light is one. There's something like that in Hello Summer Goodbye by Michael Coney, which I talked about recently. But yeah, so really, really beautiful. So I'm finishing off with Ike. So that's my little book haul. There probably will be another one with Bob later in the year, but you know, one's got to watch the pennies. And I hope you enjoyed seeing a little bit more of the warehouse. If you haven't watched any of these videos before, check the others. There are more extensive tours of the warehouse, and there is the one coming up where I look at his hardcover collection, and oh boy, it's so good, as you will see. Thanks for watching. Outlaw Bookseller. Gonna take it easy the rest of the day. Hope you enjoyed that. Bye for now, and best of luck hunting for your own A format stash. It's all out there somewhere, you know. Cheers.